morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kamak, and if you're anything like me, you love a good story. So today, I would like to tell you about the many adventures of Ka and friends. One friend that I had throughout my adventure was Miss Linda Terry from Cox North Hospital. Miss Terry is a pediatric speech therapist, and she has been one for the past 28 years now. As some of us in here may know, and I'm sure a lot of us can guess, a lot happens in 28 years, and a lot is forgotten in 28 years. However, there was one incident that occurred during Miss Terry's career that's never left her memory. So today, I would like to start off my story by telling you a slightly different story. First off, let me preface the story by telling you pediatric speech therapy really is not for the impatient. In fact, working with the child for several years on end tends to be the norm rather than the exception. So I'm sure you can imagine the excitement that follows when a pediatric speech patient suddenly makes a very unexpected breakthrough. At the time of the story, Miss Terry was working with a little boy, just 2 years old. Well, this little boy was not exactly making progress the way that Miss Terry had hoped. In fact, there was no getting this little boy to talk, period. But one day, the little boy walks into Miss Terry's office and he notices something on her knee. Miss Terry had actually injured her knee not very long ago, so it was all bandaged up. Much to Miss Terry's surprise, the little boy actually walks over to where she's sitting, pats her on the knee, he looks up at her and he asks her, "Boo-boo?" Miss Terry goes, yes, I hurt my knee. Little boy pats her knee again, this time gives it a little kiss, and he tells her better. I truly do believe that in order to be anything in the medical field, you really do have to care too much. In fact, as a part of the Medical Explorers program as well, I have followed many different nurses on several different floors. One thing that I have actually been told multiple times is that sometimes you have to drive home crying because it can be so hard. What those nurses and what Miss Terry will tell you is that their motivation for their job simply cannot come from their paycheck at the end of the month. It has to come from visible progress and the knowledge that they're making a difference, even if it is something as small as a couple words uttered by a little 2-year-old boy. And that's actually one of the reasons why I have always been so drawn to the medical field. So, from the story that I just told you, and quite frankly from the job title itself, we can all probably safely assume that a speech therapist helps their patients talk. However, that's much more complicated than it sounds. A speaking disorder can be caused by several different factors, including certain illnesses or obstacles that will affect a person's verbal communication. It can also hinder their ability to understand the people around them. When we first think of a speaking disorder, probably the first thing that comes to mind is articulation disorders. This is when a patient actually has trouble forming certain words or sounds that they need in order to communicate. A voice disorder, when a patient has trouble using the correct pitch or volume while they're speaking. Stuttering is the inability to speak with adequate speech fluency. And aphasia. This actually happens when a patient loses the ability to communicate or some kind of skill that's associated with communication. Sometimes this can occur after a stroke or some kind of head injury, and most of the time these patients will also need help with language association. Last but not least, swallowing. A lot of people actually don't know this, but this is one health concern that speech therapists have to help with, especially if they're in the field of geriatrics, which means they're working with older patients, and also patients who have to stay overnight in the hospital, also a lot of times will need help with swallowing. All speech therapists are required to have at least a master's degree, and all states require some type of licensing. The American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association is the organization that you absolutely have to be a part of if you're going to be a speech therapist, because they can grant you what's called a certificate of clinical competence. That's actually required for some jobs, and it also makes you eligible for licensing in most states. There are many skills associated with being a speech therapist, and I've simply decided to list a few. Good communication, understandably at the top of the list. If you're going to teach people to talk, not only do you need to be able to set a good example, you also have to be able to effectively communicate to them what they're doing wrong, what they can do to improve. Flexibility comes in a lot when a patient cancels or simply doesn't show up for a scheduled appointment. The speech therapist has to be able to think on their feet, know what they're going to do with that sudden hour-long void. And last but not least, patience. Like I mentioned earlier, a speech therapist, especially in the field of pediatrics, more than likely will have to work with the child for several years on end. So, not only does the speech therapist have to be patient with the child, she also has to be patient with the family or friends of that child, because a lot of times, possibly, they could get upset when the child isn't making progress the way that everyone would hope for them to. All of our internships tonight were done through a program at my high school called Kickapoo University. I've listed some of the requirements right here in order to be in the program. There are other course requirements, but I honestly feel like our senior year internship and capstone class was the epitome of what this entire program is about. College readiness, career readiness, and future planning as well. So far, I've basically spent my entire internship presentation talking to you about everything except for my internship. Now would probably be a good time to get on with the book and talk to you about the more exciting part, which of course would be my internship experience. When I first found out that I got to do an internship, I knew immediately, medical field. More specifically, I wanted to do something with speech therapy. But like I've told you earlier, you need at least a master's degree to even be a speech therapist. So for me, a high school student, to want to intern with one, very ambitious to say the least. However, after numerous phone calls, a countless number of emails, and an undeniable streak of luck, I was able to find Miss Terry from Cox North Hospital. She gave me the opportunity to intern with her for 2 hours a day, Mondays through Fridays. It wasn't until I actually got to my internship that I realized I had chosen an exceptionally interesting time to intern Miss Terry. At the time, the hospital was undergoing a lot of diagnostic code changes, or in other words, their ICD-10 codes. These codes are used internationally by hospitals, doctors, insurance companies, basically anything and everything that has to do with billing, there's an ICD-10 code for it. And trust me, when I say everything, I do mean absolutely everything. For example, if you had some kind of speech impairment due to being struck by a duck, that right there would be your appropriate ICD-10 code. Yes, that actually exists. All right. Due to all the changes in the diagnostic codes, I had to do a lot of filing and I had to do a lot of copying, but I also got to sit in on almost all of the sessions that Miss Terry had with her patients. And usually the first half of the session would consist of flashcards. Depending on what that child's individual goals and needs were, Miss Terry would ask them to maybe just tell them what's in the picture of the flashcard. Some students were asked to read the sentence on the card, so on and so forth. And a lot of the flashcards were actually categorized into different groups according to where their consonant and vowel sounds were located. So for example, the phrase right there, honeypot, H is your very clear consonant sound, O would be a clear vowel sound, N another clear consonant sound, and then so on with the rest of the phrase. The second half of the session was usually my favorite part, which was play therapy. Miss Terry would let the child pick one toy from around the room, and while the child was playing with the toy, she and I would ask them questions, try to prompt them to say certain things, once again, just depending on what that child's goals and needs were. And one afternoon while I was there, Miss Terry actually pulled out a bingo board. I thought this was really interesting. On the bingo board were a lot of prepositional phrases like up a hill or in an airport. And Miss Terry would ask the child a question, and they would have to find the correct prepositional phrase on that board, answer the question, and that's how they would play bingo. So as you can see, play therapy really is just a much less structured way than the flashcards to work on a lot of the same goals and concepts that the flashcards put an emphasis on. After my internship experience, I learned two very important things about myself. One, my future career absolutely has to have high patient interaction. Not only do I love talking to people, I love being around people, working with people, and I do love helping people. Second thing I learned, and I feel like more importantly, I learned that I love speech therapy. I understand that communication is and always has been a very important driving force in the world today. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, so I'm very passionate about trying to help people attain, possibly regain that ability. So, after high school, I would like to attend Missouri State University. One of the major deciding factors for me is their nationally recognized speech program. I know that getting into that graduate program is a goal that I have, however, after that, I don't really have a clear-cut path for it. I know I want to work in a hospital setting, I know I want to work with children, but in terms of exact location, really your guess is just as good as mine. After having spent the past 4 years with the same group of people, it's so surreal to think that in just a matter of months, we're all gonna be scattered across the country, pursuing different goals and different dreams. However, I don't think that that takes away from the fact that high school was a really good 4 years for me. After this internship, I've learned things and I've built relationships that I never would have even had the opportunity to otherwise. And honestly, I don't know if I could thank all the wonderful teachers that I've come across enough for everything that they've done for me. I have had people tell me that college really is the time of your life and that it's something to look forward to. So as nerve-wracking and as bittersweet as this ending may be right now, I'm honestly very excited to move on to the next adventure in my life. Thank you so much.